Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you on this session. So this session will focus on challenges related to deployment of large-scale industrial clean hydrogen projects. And as you might know, there are many challenges, so we are not lacking in challenges for sure. The pipeline of projects is ever growing, that's for sure, that we know that, but the FIDs are not there yet. Offtake agreements are not happening, so there are a lot of projects being delayed or just flat out cancelled. So the purpose of this meeting today and the presentations and the discussions is going to be, we will try to shed some light about what might be the reasons about why those cancellations are happening and what is the way forward to see more of those success stories to happen. So I have a great panel. I will introduce the guests later on, but please come join me on the stage and have a seat. I will introduce you all later. Yeah, just take a seat, whatever you feel more comfortable with. Yeah, but before we start the discussion with our panelists, I think it's difficult to start talking about a way forward without knowing what is the current status and current situation. And for that, there is no better source as our Clean Hydrogen Monitor, which have just published yesterday. And for that, to present the takeaways, the main takeaways of that study, to show you what is the current status of the clean hydrogen market, I have my colleague, Matus Muron, Intelligence Manager at Hydrogen Europe, and he will present you the takeaways of the recent version. Matus?
Excellent. Thank you very much for the introduction, Grzegorz. So we'll begin. So as Grzegorz mentioned, the Clean Hydrogen Monitor is our flagship publication that we publish every year. And actually, this is the 5th year that we are doing it. It has slightly changed in terms of scope, and it slightly changes every year. And this year, we are focusing on doing the current market review. So what has happened last year, what happened in 2023, what was the hydrogen demand, what was the hydrogen production capacity, what grew, what decreased. We also focus on the production costs and what were the drivers in the past for the different production pathways. And for the first time, we have also developed a forecast. So we developed a scenario. Where do we see the clean hydrogen supply in Europe to go up to 2030? So today, as Grzegorz mentioned, I'm just going to do sort of brief takeaways. The report is published, it's online, you can have a look, it's available for everyone. But in the next 9 minutes or so, I'm just really going to go through the key takeaways. So if we go, if you look on the left side and we look at what you see is the European hydrogen demand for the different sectors. The total European hydrogen demand in 2023 was 7.9 million tons, which is a very small decrease compared to 2022, but is sort of marginal, it's only 3% decrease. What is a little bit more prominent are the differences of hydrogen demand in the different end uses, so in different industry sectors. So what you can see also in the medium term, because you see data from 2019 until 2023, you can see that in the refining, actually the hydrogen consumption has been increasing, which is a result of the war in Ukraine, sort of banning Russian products, etc. So the European refineries had to compensate. And sort of opposite effect happened in ammonia and methanol industries, where due to the war in Ukraine, gas prices have increased, and these industries had to cut back on the hydrogen production and its subsequent use for ammonia, methanol, or in other chemicals. If we look on the right side, so that's for the production capacity, what we can see there is you can see a lot of gray, a lot of black, and that means that still over 95% of the 7.9 million tons that was consumed in 2023 was based on fossil fuels. You see two little, or hopefully you can see the two little squares, bottom right, which is green and turquoise, and so those two represent the water electrolysis capacity and reforming with carbon capture capacity that was there in 2023. So that was the bad news. And so now we're going to try to be a little bit more positive. What is positive, that if we still look at last year and the development specifically in water electrolysis over the last few years, we see a constant increase. So by September 2024, we have counted 385 megawatts of deployed water electrolysis capacity in Europe, so almost 0.4 gigawatts. So that's encouraging given where we started in 2020 at around 89 megawatts. And what is also encouraging is the CAGR, the compounded annual growth rate, if we calculate it over these years, is 44%. So essentially, the size of the deployed market increases by almost half every year, which is very encouraging. And in any other industry, this would be actually a relatively amazing achievement. The only constraint that sort of we have is that we are starting from such low levels that if we continued with a 44% CAGR onwards up until 2030, we would only deploy about a little bit over 3 gigawatts of water electrolysis in Europe, while we actually need to deploy dozens of gigawatts by 2030 in order to decarbonize various industries. So those were the past developments, and then now we start looking at the future. There is no better way to start looking at the future than to look at the project pipeline. So what this graph shows you are the intentions by the industry. It's not a forecast, the specific one, but those are the announced projects. So the projects that want to come online in these different years, it's accumulated by 2030. And the different colors represent the different development stages that these projects are in. The lighter the color, the less mature the project is. And so the important takeaway here is that, well, there are plenty of intentions, 14.4 million tons of clean hydrogen, so water electrolytic and clean thermochemical, could come online if everything materialized and happened. That is highly unlikely. And right now, what is under construction, and you can barely see it because the numbers are relatively small, what is under construction is about 4% of that project pipeline. So the project pipeline is 14.4 million tons, and about 0.6 million tons are FID'd under construction, so we can assume that they will be happening. But as I mentioned, this is not a forecast, and this year, for the first time, we have actually done a forecast. So what we have done is that we developed two different scenarios called the current trajectory scenario and an accelerated adoption scenario. The current trajectory scenario is sort of what it sounds, so it's based on our current understanding of the market, the current projects that have been announced, the available funding, the ambitions by different member states. This is what we believe should happen. It's not guaranteed by any sense because we are still at the beginning of deployment, and then the esteemed panelists are going to talk about the challenges that come with deploying large clean hydrogen production projects. But that is our scenario. So 1.7 million tons of electrolytic hydrogen and 0.8 million tons of clean thermochemical amounting to 2.5. And then there is an accelerated adoption scenario where if certain levers were used, if certain changes to the regulatory framework, funding, national transposition of some laws changed, where we could potentially get if we look a little bit deeper specifically on water electrolysis, and we compare our scenarios compared to the national ambitions, we can also see that the ambitions are very high. However, at least based on our forecast, the different countries will only manage around 20, 30, 40% of the water electrolysis targets that they have identified themselves in the NECPs, the National Energy and Climate Plans, or in their hydrogen strategies. So the black line that you see, so for example for Spain, while the NECP is 12 gigawatt, the actual, what we believe will happen and be developed in Spain by 2030 is only somewhere around 3 gigawatts. And you can see sort of the progress in the other countries. And the situation is similar also in the EU. So that's the smaller graph on the top right, where the current trajectory scenario that we are forecasting goes to 14 gigawatts in the whole of the EU. The accelerated adoption is 25 gigawatts, and the line that is yellow and seems that you can't see it very well, the 30 gigawatts, which represents the latest modeling from the European Commission. So what you can see is that, well, the ambition is there, also from member states. However, when we do our best to look at how the market is going to look like, the ambitions are not going to be met. And so I wanted to, in my last minute or so, I wanted to finalize with the certain levers that I've already mentioned that can be used in order to increase and ramp up further the deployment of clean hydrogen market in Europe. The first lever or element is the EU regulatory framework. So, I mean, we're certainly happy that most of the regulatory framework is there. We have targets, so there is some certainty. However, there are still certain things that impede project development, such as the RFMBO DA, the Delegated Act, which has significant impacts on economics, especially now in the early stages. Also, the fast adoption of the Low Carbon Hydrogen Delegated Act would also help the market and help some people move towards FIDs and advance their projects. A second lever is national implementation. So as I mentioned, some of the European regulation is, or most of the European regulation is already there. However, the next step is actually implementing it and transposing it on the national level. And so that is also something, until that is done, many companies are waiting to take their FIDs because they're not sure how, for example, the demand targets are going to be transposed on the national level. And so yeah, and lastly, of course, we need a little bit more clarity on the national level regarding if member states do not meet these targets, what are going to be the penalties. The next lever is funding, whether that's European funding or national funding. On the European funding, it is making the existing instruments a little bit better, more fit for purpose. For example, having H2 Bank helping with support off-taker risk, for example, and on the national funding, focusing on OPEX funding, and in some cases, in some countries, just to have those funding instruments there, because many countries do not. And then the last lever is infrastructure. Infrastructure connects producers and consumers, just like in any other industry. Of course, that infrastructure is not there yet. So we need to, again, now that the European hydrogen gas, decarbonized gas package is there, we need to focus on its implementation on national level, designate hydrogen network operators on the national level, etc. And also focus on sort of on longer-term energy system modeling that takes into account both a hydrogen system as well as an electricity system. So these are the 4 key levers that we could use to speed up the clean hydrogen ramp-up in Europe and speed up the supply. As I mentioned before, the report itself is online. You're welcome to read it. And I look forward to listening to the panel, potentially hearing some controversial opinions on our numbers, but we'll see. So I'll hand it over back to Grzegorz. Thank you.
Thank you, Matus. A round of applause. So indeed, I think that sets the discussion perfectly, because we get a good overview of what is happening. And the single most relevant number for our discussion is this 2.5 million tons of current trajectory that we can expect of production of clean hydrogen in Europe by 2030. Which is way below the REPowerEU targets, it's way below the hydrogen strategy targets, it's even below renewable energy targets, what would be required to meet those targets. So I think it's fair to say that there are challenges in implementation of those large-scale hydrogen projects, and for that I'm glad that we have such a good panel of experts, industry experts here with us. So I introduce you one by one. Starting from my left is Dimitrios Triantafyllopoulos, yes, Managing Director of Hellenic Hydrogen. It's a joint venture between PPC and Motor Oil, so green hydrogen developer in Greece, focusing on projects in Greece. So, Dimitrios has 20 years of experience in the energy market, so really someone who has hands-on experience in developing those kind of large-scale projects. Then we have Susanne Eriksson, let me check, Rostmark, a Senior Project Manager at LKAB, also a Research Lead at LKAB, focusing on oxidation of iron ores with hydrogen instead of coke. And also involved in the hybrid project, which is a green steel project in Sweden and involved in that project also from its beginning in 2016. So also a very knowledgeable expert. Then we have Grzegorz Woźniak. I think I nailed that one in terms of pronunciations. Grzegorz is a Director of Hydrogen Technologies and Synthetic Fuels Department at Orlen. So it's a very long title, but also doesn't fully reflect all the things that Grzegorz does, because he's not only developing renewable hydrogen projects at Orlen, also leading a hydrogen academy, and recently I know that you're also an energy expert of NATO, so really a good expert. Then we have Fabien Tordeur, Head of Strategy at John Cockerill Hydrogen, where he's, obviously John Cockerill is a huge industrial solution provider, but also a very important player on the hydrogen sector with alkaline and electrolyzers provider. And there Fabien is responsible for, as a head of strategy, as a head of mergers and acquisition, to making sure that the position of John Cockerill is even stronger. And finally, we have Kools, which is a decarbonization practice lead at KBC, which is a Yokogawa company. So also extensive 30 years experience in industrial and energy projects, and also involved in the Holland Hydrogen 1 project with Shell. So again, one of the largest actual project that is being implemented in Europe currently. So a great panel, I think, all very knowledgeable on implementation of those projects. But for us to leverage that we have such good guests, I would like to ask you also to ask questions during our presentation via Slido. I know that the code is somewhere visible, it should be. And you can ask questions. I will then try to pose those questions to our panelists at the end if you have time. So to start the discussion, I will start with you, Patrick, maybe. Because indeed, the mood is somehow quite negative. Those 2.5 million tons is not what we were expecting by now to be visible in terms of being in development. The FIDs are not happening. So is it really also negative in the sense that have we underestimated the challenges? Is it more difficult than we anticipated it's going to be, or is it just a normal development that all nascent industry have to go through at the very beginning, that there are some challenges and we need to just simply keep on doing and working on what we are doing, and it's solvable? So what's your take on this?
Yeah, thank you very much, Greg, for that question. I think it's actually the latter. I mean, it's very easy for us to get into a negative mood and look at all the challenges that we have actually there. And sure, 2 years ago, I think there were a lot of announcements of large projects. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, and talking about gigawatt scale. But on the other hand, we can look at those projects not going through, but the projects that are going through, and also the ones that are still under the FID radar, what we're actually seeing happening, there's a lot more reality in projects as well. We see leaders like, PK and Orlen, but also Shell, RWE. Last week I was at the refining conference in Lisbon, and you see a lot of really in-depth projects being worked out, looking at integrating hydrogen into current supply chains, new supply chains. So I'm actually very positive. I feel a lot of reality. And, maybe we've been ambitious with the targets that we actually set, but the progress is actually being made. And maybe we are not yet quite ready for the scale that the world needs. Yeah, because the world does need scale. But I think if we dive in depth into the hydrogen projects and start talking about that, the question is, are we already ready for the scaling that we wanted to happen? And I think a bit more maturing needs to take place for us to do that. But I'm very positive, and look around you at all the companies, the things that they're doing, all the high quality people that are here. So, I think we're looking at an exciting trajectory ahead.
Okay, thanks. So maybe I continue with you, Fabien, then, because even if we adopt this positive outlook, it's still undisputable that there are some significant challenges. And one of those is certainly related to the variability of renewables, especially when you are producing renewable hydrogen. That's a challenge both on the end user side in industry, which often requires a steady supply of hydrogen, but it's also a challenge on the electrolyzer side, right? In terms of being able to deal with that variable load that can pose challenges to efficiency, durability, electrode coating, so all of those elements. And then project developers are somehow stuck in a situation that they don't know which technology to go for. Do we go for the more mature alkaline, but which might not be as flexible, or we go for the more flexible PEM, which might be more expensive currently? So what's your take on that? What do you advise to project developers on this?
Thank you. So that's a very good question. People tend to oppose indeed PEM and alkaline, saying PEM is very flexible, but expensive. Alkaline is more mature, better for baseload, not flexible at all. That tends to underestimate, well, that ignores the fact that there's actually a technology in between that's called pressurized alkaline, such as the ones that we at Cockerill offer. Those electrolyzers provide hydrogen at a pressure of 15 bars, and they have several advantages. The advantages are that the footprint is much reduced already versus an atmospheric electrolyzer, alkaline electrolyzer, but also a much better capacity to track the variable load of renewable electricity. So a pressurized alkaline electrolyzer can ramp up from minimum load to maximum load in about 15 seconds, whereas an atmospheric one will do so in about 10 minutes. So it's a significant change when you want to connect your electrolyzer to renewable sources, and that's obviously the goal when you work with green hydrogen. And let's say a second aspect is that when you compare those, typically the comparison is done on a single electrolyzer level, whereas if you want to go for large-scale industrial production of hydrogen, typically you will have dozens of electrolyzers set up next to each other. And so part of the flexibility that you'll need within a system will actually be provided at system level and not at the stack level. And that's very important as well. So yeah, I would say that those are the two main differences. And so we believe that going for let's say large-scale industrial scale, what we see in the market is that there's very strong demand for pressurized alkaline electrolyzers because people feel that it's the technology that's best able to meet the needs today. It doesn't require precious metals. It doesn't require, or it doesn't use PFAS as much in the stack or in the membrane. So there's quite a lot of advantages, and it has a longer track record. There's more units installed. We have at Cockerill installed projects of more than 100 megawatts already, and those are running, and that provides a significant return of experience as well.
Okay, thank you. But Grzegorz, that solves the problem on the supply side, but there is also another problem which I also alluded to on the demand side. When you are going to be using renewable hydrogen in a refinery, when you are faced with those all RFNBO rules, especially in Poland with our grid, with those rules are challenging, and you are somehow pushed into strict load following of renewables. And on the other end, you have a refinery which really requires steady supply of hydrogen. So how to deal with that?
Yes, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak here on this, in my opinion, very important topic, because we are talking about challenges. And Orlen is producing fuels, so we have refineries, but we also producing fertilizers, chemicals, so also we need hydrogen in this area. And if you are talking about the offtake of unstable hydrogen produced from res and electrolyzer, we are talking about changing totally the situation on refinery side, because today we produced hydrogen on steam methane reformers, stable delivery of hydrogen, and no challenges connected with some kind of instability and impact for our, let's say, many makers units like hydrocracker or hydroprocessing units. So, but how to manage it? There are two solutions. First, of course, we can have pipeline connection, storage system. In high volume production hydrogen, we need probably salt caverns will be the only one solutions. So for this kind of solution, we need time, and for sure, this project pipeline which was presented would look even worse. But there is second solution, because refinery ecosystem, hydrogen ecosystem, is very, very big. We have kilometers of pipelines, we have many off-takers, many producing units, and this ecosystem can be prepared for this unstable consumption of hydrogen by, in my opinion, small investment in this area, just software and some kind of hardware solution just to optimize this hydrogen ecosystem. So, in my opinion, this is the solution, and we developing this kind of approach in our Gdańsk refinery in north of Poland, when we would like to install high-volume production units with electrolysis capacity more than 400 megawatts, and taking into account the opportunity of the refinery ecosystem, we would like in this type of project realize our RED III goals. The second topic which you mentioned regarding the RFNBO definition and these challenges, especially in Poland, this is huge challenges because our grid is quite carbon intensity. And if we are talking about RFNBO definition, honestly speaking, this additionality rule probably killing this final investment decision, and probably this project pipeline looks today that we do not deliver the goal. Why? Because if we are talking about this additionality, we need to, starting from 2028, install RES capacity not older than 36 months than electrolyzers unit, and not subsidized. So this is totally impossible to find enough renewables, enough, let's say, mix of renewables, which allow us to utilize electrolyzer on the high utilization level. So this is the big challenge, and in my opinion, if, for example, this additionality could be postponed, starting to, for example, 2035, it allows us to make this final investment decision quicker, and we can realize our goals.
Okay, thank you. But do you mean mostly relaxing the rules or opening the door a bit wider for other technologies? What would be your preferred take on this?
Yeah, this is I would say this was the first postulate from our side. Second one is technological neutrality. This is something which is very important if we are talking about the challenge of climate neutrality. And in our opinion, we should realize this goal with all available technologies which deliver us GHG emission reduction. And today, the preferable technology is RFNBO type based on electrolysis process. We should consider, let's say, implementation this technological neutrality approach, and for example, to give us opportunity to develop this type of technology like waste to hydrogen, nuclear to synthetic fuels. In my opinion, this is the main goal. Carbon neutrality, not the, let's say, only one solution, and this famous statement that green hydrogen, this is something which shouldn't be used as a name. We should use full rainbow of hydrogen colors.
Okay, thank you. I go to you, Dimitrios, because you have somehow opposite problems, right, in Greece. I mean, in Poland, they face a solution that renewables are not there. They are needed for the grid decarbonization. They're expensive. On the other hand, there are a lot of industrial off-takers who need that hydrogen. And you, it's different. You have a lot of renewables, low-cost renewables, but the industrial off-takers are not there. And yet still you are developing projects. So how you are working around that issue?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the invite. On a general note, last year in this B2B Forum, the main discussion was about this 4%, if you remember, 4% of the projects that actually arrived at FID compared to the ones that were actually announced. This year, you put another number. You put this 2.5 million tons of hydrogen with regards to the 10 million tons of hydrogen for 2030. So just this question for all of us here in the room. I mean, is the market not going as it should be, or can we ask ourselves, are we placing the correct targets? You know, is the market ready for these targets? Is the technology ready for these targets? And who is putting these targets? I mean, are there people that actually know the reality of developing and executing a project on the ground, especially under this new energy reality? So I'm not very sure, just food for thought. Yes, in Greece we don't have similar problems, and the problem is that we have vast renewable energy. Just to give you some figures, we have now 14 giga of installed RES capacity in Greece, and the total annual demand is 7 giga. And the projected RES capacity installed for 2030 is going to be 40 gigawatt. These are projects that are actually in the pipeline, they are financed, and they are ready to be built. So you can imagine how much power we are currently throwing, and we will be throwing in the future. So the problem here is how to capture this renewable power, to transform it to something else, and to make an end product that will be delivered to an end customer. And I think here is what we missed when we placed these targets. And this is the role of infrastructure. Because Europe is not a country, it's a continent, and every country has its own characteristics. So you have strong RES potential in the south, you have strong demand, industrial demand in the north. So yes, there are gigawatts of projects, but you have to connect supply and demand. And I think we missed the crucial role of infrastructure and how long it takes for a new infrastructure to take place.
Okay, thank you. So maybe from Poland, with its own sets of problems, and Greece with a different set of problems, we go to Sweden, which is also in a kind of unique situation, right? Because you have industry there, you have renewables, and you already have a grid that is low carbon enough so that you don't have to worry about additionality, you don't have to worry about temporal correlation, because those rules almost do not apply in Sweden anymore. And that's why also Sweden was one of the most cost-competitive country in the recent H2 bank auction. But still, when we are talking about projects like hybrid with multi-hundreds of megawatts of power requirement for that connection, you still need to connect that to the grid, and that surely is not as easy as it sounds, right? So can you elaborate maybe a little bit on that, on those challenges related to securing that power, even in a situation as simple as in Sweden?
Yes, of course. Yes, we have the power available, and that is also why we have set the hybrid project in the northern parts of Sweden, because we have the two raw materials needed. We have the iron ore, and we have the green electricity available, but we needed to develop the technology to reduce the iron ore with hydrogen. And the key thing in this project is that today we export oxygen together with the iron that we mine in the northern parts, and that oxygen is reduced with coal all around in Sweden and Europe and other countries around the world. Everywhere we send iron ore, it's reduced with coal. So our contribution to these greenhouse gas emissions is to take away the oxygen at a source where we also have renewable energy. So we can produce hydrogen and take away the oxygen with hydrogen, producing only water vapor. So that's the key thing with this technology. We have two types of raw materials, but the amount of raw materials we have in Sweden, we can produce about 30 million tons of iron ore pellets per year, and we know that we have ore until 2060, so that's a very long time. But we do not have renewables to match that. So we can go along for the first 15 terawatt hours, and then we need to really increase the amount of renewables in Sweden. So to look at Sweden as a country in the continent, and with the possibilities of making new industrial technologies using this, we could use about double as much as we produce today to be able to meet the demands of the industry, and a lot of the demand will go through hydrogen. But this, in the short term, we also need to work with the transmission of energy within Sweden, and the permitting process is always challenging because this is also areas with many other interests, like Sami people or other recreational or other types of land use. So it's a long process, and we have a really thorough environmental permitting processes, so to speak, and quite slow. But for the hybrid project, we are late with the key project because of permitting. So the transmission grid will be in order at the time when we get the permissions in order. So.
Okay, thank you. So, but I think it's fair to say that you don't develop those kind of projects without close cooperation with the transmission system operator, right?
No, we need to be really walking hand in hand. And we need to be really clear about our needs in the future because of the processes taking so long time. So we need to say already now that this is the way that we will develop. This is our needs in the future.
Yeah, thank you for that. Patrick, I go back to you then, because there was a lot of discussion about complexities, also about, connecting to the grid is one thing, then managing variable rate of renewables, then integrating that whole process in a industrial off-taker like a refinery. And when I hear all of that, I cannot help but being reminded of the project that we are now developing in Port of Rotterdam, where you are, correct me if you're wrong, you are looking exactly at that, at trying to integrate multiple industries around the energy consumption to optimize that, reduce the energy consumption, so how they can, some kind of close industrial collaboration almost on that element. Can you explain a little bit about that project and how maybe there are some early takeaways? I know the project is already only ongoing, it's not finished yet, but maybe there are already some takeaways that you can share with us on that.
Yeah, I certainly can. So what we are looking at together with Port of Rotterdam and some large industrial players there, and also with the power suppliers, the local and the national grid, is basically also to see what would happen if you start integrating, coordinating the use of energy across multiple plants. And we're going to start this trial in January, where we're really going to start doing a shadow run initially to see what happens if we start optimizing not just electricity, but also steam, hydrogen, and heat across multiple companies in order to optimize. But I think the key takeaway from it is that, and that's a word I want to introduce as a barrier that we are facing, is the challenge of integration. And integration plays at many levels. Yeah? We see an opportunity, this is at a plant level. By integrating plants together, we can also start creating the opportunity for shared infrastructure, for example, a shared battery, etc. But if we go a level lower, what we are also seeing is that the successful hydrogen projects are ones where there's a lot of thinking about how do I integrate a hydrogen project, not as a standalone, but really how do I integrate it into a local value chain, creating methanol as a drop-in, really integrating it into your refinery. So integration thinking is a very important part of it. We also discovered that at the lower level, in the hydrogen plant itself, where many of us come from the process industry, and we're used to scaling up very easily. But I think we need to see that hydrogen is a very different beast as well, because it's bringing together electrons and molecules. So it's bringing together the electrical industry and the molecules industry. And I know very few people that are both really good process engineers and really good electrical engineers. That's a big challenge in itself. What we also found, again, at a lower level, when we're building a large hydrogen plant like Holland Hydrogen 1, suddenly you're looking at a plant which looks very different. Suddenly 80% of our scope is related to package integration. It's no longer process control, but it's integrating all sorts of standalone packages into one plant which is very, very complex because they all come with their own system, their own controls, and just operating that as one plant is not so easy. So we're increasingly bringing in technologies that look at integration at the plant level, integrating the hydrogen plant also with its upstream wind farm, with its downstream wind farm, using things like, Bax Energy that we're using, but also again at a higher level, integrating the different plants together so that the variability is actually being solved, like Fabien said, at a system level, rather than having to be solved at a deep electrolyzer level. So I think one of the challenges we have in this whole transition is integration, and integration equals collaboration. Because what we find is that you can only find real solutions if you really work together and you really start collaborating. And I was having a pre-talk earlier with my colleague from PK and Orlen, and he also said, how do you then solve the trust issue between parties? So I think the biggest challenge that we have in speeding up this transition is that we're all trying to innovate and everybody wants to have his or her technology to, of course, scale and grow, but we also need to collaborate very closely together and look at supply chains, look at how we can work with the network, and also how can we automate across all these different plants. So I think it's a very exciting time, and we need to get closer together from this perspective.
Okay, thank you. But also the key word I think you use is integration. And Fabien, I know you are working together with Technip Energies on with this joint venture, Ali, which is developing a standardized electrolyzer unit, which I think, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the objectives of developing is exactly that, to make it a bit easier to integrate those electrolyzer blocks somehow in industrial settings.
Correct. If we go back to discussion of we probably won't get to the objective that we set for ourselves. Was the objective right or not? I think it's important to realize that what we're trying to do is extremely complex. We're taking a very, very niche industry that was very small, and let's say 4 years ago we had about 30% market share in the electrolyzer market. All of that was in China, and the amount in euros of revenue is peanuts. So it's a super small industry, and we're trying to make it very large immediately. And to be able to produce massive amounts, millions of tons of hydrogen, whereas previously those uses were only for very small production, niche applications. And so the paradigm changes completely. And so what we're trying to do is extremely complex, and typically when things are complex, it tends to be expensive, and it tends to take a lot of time. And that's exactly what we're trying to address through our JV with Technip Energies, is that we created basically what is the first company that's doing product development, service, and EPC focused on green molecules. And the way we address the challenges that people have is basically trying to decrease the costs and trying to decrease the time to market that projects take to be developed, to be put in service. And the way Relay, which is this joint venture, does it, and Relay has announced a few months ago, back in June. So Relay was created last year, so it's about 1 year old, almost, day to day. And 6 months ago, Relay announced its first product, which is called the Clear 100 Plus. It's a standardized brick of 100 megawatts. And the goal of that is it's built around John Cockerill's electrolyzers, so pressurized alkaline electrolyzers, and it's optimized. And we see a lot of opportunities to optimize not only within the scope of John Cockerill, and we have obviously a lot of research and development to do there, but also at the system level, integrating that within the plant to make it cheaper and faster to develop. And so Relay, the Clear 100 Plus, has about 35% less pieces of equipment within the plant. It has reduced the footprint by about 40 to 50%. So those are significant gains. And that's only for the first version of the product. So there will be new versions that go even further. And this has already a significant impact in terms of LCOH reduction. It's about €1 per kilo decrease because you're standardized. Now, all projects will not be standardized going forward, but the learnings we get from standardizing these projects will benefit all the projects that we developed, either at John Cockerill or within Relay. So that's well, big gains, and we're quite encouraged because since we announced the Clear 100 Plus, we've seen a lot of other companies coming up with, let's say, similar products, 100 megawatts standardized products, and so that really encourages us in thinking that we're on the right way, and the feedback that we've got is extremely positive.
But it's also pressurized alkaline, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for that. So I think we've talked a lot about the technological challenge, but I think it will be difficult to discuss, low rate of FIDs without touching at least the cost issue that renewable hydrogen is still relatively expensive. So I would like to ask you, Susanne, because I know that the hybrid project received a lot of, a significant grant from the Innovation Fund, 150 million if I'm not mistaken. But still, Innovation Fund only covers part of the funding gap, 60%, so there is still 40% left. So how do you manage to close that? Is it a question of the companies just eating that loss, or is it a question of finding off-takers who are willing also to pay some green premium? And if so, if you could share which sectors, when it comes to off-takers for steel, are those that maybe are willing to pay a little bit more as a green premium compared to maybe some others?
Yes, but yes, I could elaborate on that. We have, apart from the funding from the Innovation Fund, we also have funds from the Swedish Energy Agency, because we have an IPK project. Hybrid is an IPK project as well, so we have some more grants. But the basic business model, the value chain that we are demonstrated in the project, have an end user, and the end user will basically, in the end, we need them to be able to pay a premium for this green steel product. And this was actually the driver for starting this venture now, because research on how to reduce iron ore with hydrogen had been done by us, first in the 50s, when hydrogen was big, then in the 70s when we had the energy crisis. But this time SSAB came to us and said, hey, we think there is a market for this green hydrogen. What do you know about the technology, the maturity? So we could take our archives and say, well, in lab scale we know it works, but we would like to make process development to really see it work real life. And I think it was important that we took the time to develop the technology so we can feel that we are robust in that, so we can dare to take the investment decisions to go forward, but also to challenge the market, because when we said that we have the technology to make the green steel, SSAB could see that their customers were also eager to be part of this. So SSAB have off-takers for the hybrid steel, Alfa Laval, Volvo, so many of the car manufacturers have been interested, and there are a few trucks made with this, with green steel, and some heat exchangers as well. So it's a niche product, and I think one of the key things is that it's not the products with bulk steel when you have many tons of steel, it's the small parts. So in the first parts we made calculations on, okay, but how much more expensive would it be if we introduce green steel in a car? And the cost for that, if it's 30% more expensive, it's about 700 to 900 kilos. It doesn't impact the price of the car so much. So it would basically be the same amount that you pay for a extra special finish on the car. And if you ask customers, at least in Sweden, they say, yes, I would pay that extra premium for the green steel. And the manufacturers, they say, but we will sell nothing else than cars with green steel. So it's a niche product, but we are dependent on the end customer also contributing to the gap.
Yeah, thank you. You wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, I just want to support that argument, because I think the constant comparison against hydrocarbons is not fair, you know. I mean, hydrocarbons been there for 150 years. It's fully optimized value chain. They can supply energy at ridiculously low cost, subsidized as well. So I think, putting the bar that high at the moment to compete at that level, it's maybe discouraging ourselves. But this type of innovation where you're really looking, maybe at the moment at creating a premium, small volume product that really is placed well and doesn't really affect the price, I think that is the way that we're going to get to growth. And scale, it will happen at some point. But I think, putting as an objective, if you talk about setting an objective, setting the objectives that hydrogen needs to compete today with a 150-year-old, highly optimized, subsidized energy, it's not going to happen. That's not how the path is going to go, I think.
I think it's a fair point, but also, kind of looking from a point of view of Orlen, also, if you are using that green hydrogen in a refinery process, you are still producing conventional fuels, and you are somehow your own off-taker in this case, so willingness to pay a green premium doesn't change much for you, right? Because you are paying for yourself, and you are still producing conventional fuels, so it's also difficult to find end user willing to pay that premium because, they are just buying regular fuels, right? So what, for you, do you see a way forward other than just subsidies? And if subsidies, then how does Hydrogen Bank work for you?
Yes. First comments regarding this approach, regarding the creation technologies and premium products, just to create some additional margin. This is easy to talk if you are not refinery or fertilizers producer. we have goals, RED III directive, and we need to realize it within the nearest 5 years. So this is the huge challenges, and this is the true that we are our own off-taker of our production of renewable hydrogen, and there is gap which need to be covered, and European Hydrogen Bank, it is very good solution, but should be somehow adjust, because based on this first auction, we learned that we cannot compete with this country like Spain, Portugal. We like Poland, Germany, because the capacity factor of RES are totally different. We are in worst situation, so we think that it is worth to consider implementation some of solution with regional baskets on the level of this access to renewables, capacity factors, which allow us to compete in peers, let's say, group. This is the one solution. And of course, what is very important, this solution also provides one very important, let's say, energy resilience. This is something which we very often forget, but our geopolitical situation is not easy. And each country should build its own energy independence. So building this kind of regional baskets will allow to create in each country some kind of own production of hydrogen and provide some resilience to some energy shocks like we faced during the war on Ukraine or COVID period.
Okay, thank you. So just before we go to Q&A, maybe last question to you, Dimitrios, because we talked about, again, technology, prices, but there is maybe one of those levers that Matus mentioned, Dmitry, which is regulatory framework. On the EU level with the Green Deal package and delegated act, it's almost done, but how is it looking at the regional, national level? Is it all ready to implement projects, or are there many gaps still there?
Yeah, it's almost done, but I feel we are shooting our foot, because let's take the principle of additionality and the principle of hourly correlation. Okay, these are the two items I believe all of us are thinking on a daily basis when we are developing projects. And why we put these two constraints? Because the idea was that the hydrogen economy would come and cannibalize renewable energy, and so the electrification targets would not be met. So again, I'm asking a question, just a food for thought. You have the AI business now data centers business coming in, huge energy consumers. I haven't seen any regulation in Europe saying that a new data center has to have an hourly correlation and an additionality principle. So, yeah, I mean, we need to look very seriously into these things. On the member state level, and speaking out of experience because I come from a country or a region that we are developing projects with no national strategy, hydrogen strategy in place and no regulatory framework, I have to say that I'm being a bit conscious about the fact that we are trying to solve every problem from the beginning. You know, when you develop a new market, you don't have to take all this time to see all the little details that might affect in the future your project or the market. And historically speaking, in the renewable sector, in the natural gas sector, I don't remember when they started to have all these complex processes in places and all this time needed to create a basic regulatory framework that will evolve in the future. There will be revisions, there will be versions, and will get better. But as the market matures, so I'm afraid that because the hydrogen market is not yet a standalone market, we are, let's say, bringing in people from the natural gas business, the electricity business, that have this task of developing these regulatory frameworks. And I'm being very conscious of the fact that they do not start from the basic concept of let's try to assist the market, to build a market from the beginning with basic functions and then develop on that, but try to start from the end. So putting all these complex scenarios, all these, I mean, yes, it is linked to the electricity market, it is linked to the natural gas market, but it's a new market. Let's help it develop, not put constraints.
Okay, fair enough, I guess. So I'm now going to go through the questions and see whether there are some that might be also complementing our discussion. I already see one, because we talked about H2 Bank. So Fabien, there is one question I think for you, which is mentioned the resilience criteria. That is now a new element in the upcoming H2 Bank auction. What would be your comment on that resilience criteria? Is it something that you see as a positive? How do you view that? It's just maybe remind audience what that resilience criteria is for a start.
Yes, well, I would say there's a lot of elements in terms of resilience, but the tagline measure that was taken as part of the second wave of projects, or the call for the second wave of project, is that the EU wants to limit electrolyzers imported from China up to 25%. And the way they define that is you have to have assembly, surface treatment, and the production of bipolar plates done in Europe. Obviously, that can raise some questions on our side as a European manufacturer, and I would say a European manufacturer that has a factory in Europe, but also one that has a factory in China. So we know the Chinese market very well. We think what is important is to have fair competition. And the Chinese ecosystem is very vibrant. There's a tremendous amount of innovation. The market in China is very, very large. And the players there, the local players, tend to get significant funding from the Chinese state, Chinese government at all levels. And so that means that they get a very strong advantage. They have a market in which they can develop, and then they can go abroad let's say in Europe or elsewhere in the world and let's say export their electrolyzers. Now, it's a question of political choice. Do we want to have a thriving electrolyzer industry in Europe? And if yes, we can, but we need to act and we need to make sure that we support the European electrolyzer manufacturers. Or are we fine with what happened in batteries or what happened in PV solar panels, and all of that is done in China and we're comfortable with it? It's a political choice. If you want manufacturing to be done in Europe, we have the competencies, we have sufficient players, we have know-how. That's not the issue, but we need support, we need the projects that are, you would never see in China, projects that are subsidized going to European manufacturers. So if we can't get that, it's really a question of fairness in the market, and we need support. And so we welcome the rules, and we would expect them to trickle down to all projects that are subsidized by the EU or by EU member states, whether in Europe or outside of Europe, when you're considering projects for imports.
Okay, thank you. I think we're a minute before time, but I think we will be saved if we are just a couple of minutes later, because I see two questions that are difficult to address to any of you, so volunteers are welcome, because the questions are about two challenges that we haven't talked about, and one is about public acceptance. Do you see that as a challenge in the projects that we are developing, that public acceptance is something that is easy, or is it something that maybe also poses some issues? Please go ahead.
Yes, I think that we should work on that, about this public acceptance, and we should show this technology as a safety, with safety solutions like some additional systems which protect us regarding the hydrogen implementation projects. And we in Orlen, we organize Hydrogen Academy, which, let's say, was prepared for young talents, but thanks to this program, also we, let's say, promote hydrogen technologies. And honestly speaking, we as a Orlen, we prepare special book with our hydrogen projects portfolio, because this is worth to present these projects as a safety projects, and we can even, let's say, organize site visits just to show that the hydrogen technology can be safe. And by the way, for this book, 4 years ago, I would pay a few millions euro just to have this knowledge about these different technologies. More than 40 projects, so strongly encourage you to visit our stand Orlen and look for this small book.
Thanks. You, Patrick, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, and this is such a good example. I think we really need to work on it, and that's also easy, because I think as an industry we shoot ourselves in the foot. If we keep, of course there are challenges on policy and whatever, but again, how exciting it is, you know, the things that we're inventing, the things that we're learning. And I think the most important public acceptance that we need is young people, you know, not feeling, oh, I'm getting into an industry I don't want to get into, but young people feeling, wow, you know, this is an industry where I can apply all my new skills, you know, from AI to, you know, deep process skills to, you know, building new supply chains and whatever. And I think that excitement, that's also going to drive us very much. So we need to be careful in how we talk about the challenges that we have. You know, do we like it, or are we complaining about it? And I think the booklet from Pietje and Orlen is a really good example about, you know, how we're developing cool things.
So maybe one last question also about one remaining challenge that we didn't talk about, water supply. Is this really that big of an issue? Because sometimes it's being painted, but I mean, a lot of water is used even for conventional fuel production, right? So is this really a challenge that you face with these projects? Maybe, you know? Yeah?
Okay. Well, in our case, not really. Although we come from a country that is facing a lot of side effects of the climate crisis, we have a changed, you know, environment in the last 10 years that is amazing. How the whole terrain has changed in terms of agriculture and rainfall. But on the other hand, the beauty of electrolysis is that you can use water that is not impacting the water cycle of an area. In our case, we design our projects with a minimum impact on the water cycle, not affecting other uses of water, like, of course, drinking water or even agriculture and irrigation. A good example is that we have a strategic partnership with the water authorities, and we are getting, or we plan to get water from the wastewater treatment facilities of Greece. And this actually is a huge development, because not only it doesn't create an imbalance of the water cycle, but also saves money for the water utility company. And there are other ideas. I'm sure my colleagues have other ideas. It is important, coupling it with the public acceptance, to make people understand that an electrolysis plant can use any kind of water with the necessary, I mean, it's a matter of cost, okay? We can treat it, and for sure, we do not impact the water cycle, which is very, very, very important, especially in the south of Europe from the last years.
Okay. Susanne, on this topic, maybe last word from you.
Yes. We see that water could be a challenge in the future. We can manage in this first demonstration step, but going further, we are also securing land close to a water reservoir with good amounts of electricity as well. So in the future, we might need to pipeline hydrogen to our site.
Okay,
so it can be a challenge, even though you think we have a lot of water up there, but we need more.
Thank you very much. So that would be it for our panel discussion. Hopefully it provided some valuable insights. So I would like to thank you very much for your insights and knowledge. So thank you.
Thank you, Greg.